Hi everyone, my name is Amy Morris and I work for the Modern Slavery team at West Yorkshire Police. Today I'm going to be talking you through a presentation about county lines general awareness. We're going to be talking about what is county lines, who is vulnerable and why, some signs of county lines exploitation and some useful resources and support that's available. At West Yorkshire Police we have a dedicated county lines team that works on county line operations and safeguarding individuals who are vulnerable to being exploited by county lines. Here is the Home Office definition for county lines, but the main points to note are that it involves exporting illegal drugs into other areas using a dedicated mobile phone or deal line, and also an element of exploitation. You may hear people refer to this as going country or going out of town, something along them lines. West Yorkshire is an exporting force, which means that the drugs are being moved from West Yorkshire into other areas. So, for example, from West Yorkshire to North Yorkshire. Therefore, we may find missing children from West Yorkshire located in other areas. County lines is a growing cause for concern, and it's not just drug dealing, it's exploitation. And children as young as 8 years old have been identified as being exploited through county lines. These 3 points must be met to classify an OCG, organised crime group, as a county line rather than a drugs OCG. Number 1, a dedicated telephone line, branded drugs line, or another form of deal line needs to be identified. Number 2, the exploitation of children or vulnerable adults. And number 3, use of violence, manipulation, and/or weapons. For example, if a deal line is not identified, then it is probably a drugs OCG. In the early stages of identifying an OCG, it's likely to be mapped as a drugs OCG, until phone numbers, brand of deal line has been identified. Why does it matter if it's mapped as a county line rather than a drugs line? Drugs OCGs are monitored differently to a county line OCG that's been mapped. We're less likely to make the links cross-border. There could be missed opportunities in intelligence. Often, where exploitation is identified, a different approach is required by all parties involved. There are 3 types of county lines. First one, a traditional county line, and it fulfills the definition that we've been talking about so far. For example, one force area exporting into another force area. For example, the Met into West Yorkshire or West Yorkshire into North Yorkshire. An internal line for the force. This means it originates within the force boundaries, but still has an import and export area. So, for example, from Leeds District into Huddersfield District. And finally, an internal line for district. This means it originates within a particular district and is exported, imported within the same district. So, for example, Calderdale, it could be exported from Halifax Centre into Hebden Bridge. So, why do OCGs go country? Firstly, as they're going across borders into other force areas, it makes it more difficult for forces to detect and track them. Where does the responsibility lie? In which force area? There is a receptive customer base. Customers in more rural or suburban areas have a limited access to drug supplies, and therefore the demand is higher. OCGs are very adaptable, and we've seen that recently during the COVID-19 lockdown, but I'll talk more about the impact COVID-19 has had on county lines later on. But OCGs are less likely to come into blows with rival gangs in more rural areas. And these sort of areas tend to be a lot easier for them to overcome and take control. And finally, the financial benefits. OCGs are all about the money, and they can easily make £2,000 or more in one day. County lines is not just a drugs problem, it's exploitation, and it's often linked with other forms of criminality. An OCG is often involved in a variety of different criminal activities. For example, they could be involved in knife crime, gun crime, the trafficking of firearms. They could also be involved in child sexual exploitation and even homicide. Firstly, we'll focus on the vulnerabilities surrounding children. Children at any age can be exploited through county lines, and the grooming can start at an early age. We'll talk about the grooming line further on. We see that around 15 and 16 years old is the most common age where they start to come to the attention of the authorities. We see both male and females being exploited. There is a misconception that it's mainly males, but females are also used. They're used in the transportation of drugs and money, as well as attracting and enticing young males into the OCG. In West Yorkshire, we see a mixture of ethnicities being exploited through county lines, and those children who have prior experience of neglect, physical or sexual abuse are more vulnerable to being exploited. If the child doesn't have a stable home or for children in care, the traffickers will look at what that child is missing and offer them this, whether that's a sense of belonging, a sense of care, or a sense of safety. Clean skins are increasingly being used. These are children who come from more stable backgrounds and aren't known to services, so they're less likely to be identified or stopped by the police or by social services. Sometimes children have family members who are involved in this sort of criminality, and therefore they get exploited by them closest to them. If a child is excluded from mainstream education, it makes them more vulnerable. And finally, exchange students. We've seen these being used as money mules for OCGs. This is where the OCG will ask to use that person's bank account to launder their money through, and that child will then receive a certain amount of money for doing so. Now we'll look at vulnerable adults. Any adult with a vulnerability can be exploited, and in terms of county lines, we see this a lot for drug users. They may get offered free drugs in order to run drugs or money for the OCGs, or even offer their address for the OCGs to use, but we'll talk more about cuckooing later on. Those that are in a financial situation that's difficult, this might be their weakness and their only way to get money fast. Those that are homeless or at risk of homelessness, they may be offered free accommodation in a location where they're dividing up or keeping the drugs. Those with a previous criminal record, adults with any mental health issue or learning disability, and those that need some sort of sense of belonging or safety. Similar with children, the traffickers will look at what that individual is missing in their life and offer it to them. There have been cases where traffickers have targeted recovering drug addicts outside of pharmacies and homeless shelters. It's important to keep these in mind if you are working with a vulnerable adult who falls into this category and at risk of being exploited. But also if you're working with a child whose parents or responsible adults also fall into this vulnerable category. This is the grooming line, and I'm not going to read through all the stages as it's quite self-explanatory and you can read under each section. But this is the process that an OCG will go through when they're targeting and grooming children into criminal exploitation. It's also the same processes and stages for child sexual exploitation. One thing I will add, and that's quite common in county lines cases, is during the once they've targeted the child and they've given them maybe a small job to do. So they may not say that it's drugs, they may just ask them to take this package from one place to this address. Once they do that, then the OCG will say, okay, so you've just done your first drugs run, you're now kind of in with us, in with the OCG. And then it may be that the next time they do it, the OCG will arrange for the child to be jumped and the drugs to be stolen from the child or the vulnerable adult. So then that child or vulnerable adult will go back to the OCG and say, look, I'm sorry, I got jumped, the drugs were stolen from me, and then they're trapped. And then they have to work more for the OCG in order to pay off the money or the drugs that they've lost. So this is the child's journey through criminal exploitation. At the middle you have the child, then at the top in the corally colour you have the perpetrator going through the target stage, the test and the trap stage, and below in the green you have the same for professionals, so preventing, the disruption and the supporting. I would suggest watching this video. It's about 10 minutes long and it's an interview with a member of an OCG, and he talks about recruiting and trapping children for the use of county lines. But just a warning, it does contain strong language, so just be wary of where you're watching this. This links to the grooming line and some other things that we've already spoken about, but I just wanted to flag the recruitment methods. And this is a national intel gap that we currently have, but we're all aware that our children are vulnerable everywhere, even when they're online. Especially recently through COVID-19, a lot of people have been spending more time online, and a big recruitment method for traffickers is through social media, so things like Snapchat, Instagram. You may or may not be aware that on Snapchat, for example, there is a map feature, so someone can open Snapchat, click on this feature and see all the Snapchat users and where they are in their local area. So a trafficker can then click on a certain individual or pick an individual and send them a message and reach out that way. Unfortunately, there's a lot of role models that we wouldn't want our children to follow, and the traffickers will splash around on social media their extravagant lifestyle, taking photos of all their money, their designer gear, having the latest phones, the latest clothes, driving around in expensive cars, and really promoting that to children and promoting that you don't need education to earn a lot of money in life, and you can just be like them, have an easy life and make a lot of money without having to work hard through school and get an education. The next couple of slides relate to a case study / scenario. Obviously, if this presentation was being delivered in a different way, then it would be done slightly differently. But as it's online, just have a read through it, see what you think about it. This is quite a common story. What would you do in your kind of professional capacity if you were faced with this child, say, and have a think about that. So squaring is an increasing trend that we're seeing all over the country. And this is when an OCG will take control over somebody's bank account or debit card. Usually they'll do this so they can launder or clean their money through. Children have been approached by OCGs and have been offered money for their bank cards. It's important to note that if a child mentions, or even a vulnerable adult mentions, that someone's using their card or their bank account, to just investigate this a little bit further. It's also an easy way for children especially to make money, as they don't have to do anything apart from give the OCG their bank account or debit card, and they can make some money from it. Cuckooing. So cuckooing is when a drug dealer or gang take over a vulnerable adult's address for the purposes of criminal activity. So this is usually to supply drugs, store drugs, or produce them. And we often see cuckooing linked to county lines criminality. So who's targeted? So those that suffer from drug or any sort of addiction, including alcohol addiction, those who are struggling financially, the elderly, people with mental health issues, individuals with learning disabilities, any sort of vulnerability that a OCG can exploit in order to use their premises. So it usually starts when a gang member befriends a vulnerable adult. They'll be charming and then they'll manipulate them in order to quickly build a rapport. So, for example, they could pretend that they're in a relationship with them. They'll then offer the vulnerable adults something of interest or whatever they're missing or their weaknesses. So it could be a relationship, it could be just a friendship, or it could be drugs, money, clothing, anything like that. In exchange for that, they'll ask to borrow a room to store something or meet friends at the property. Sometimes they make it clear that it's for criminal purposes, or sometimes they'll make an excuse as to why they want to use the property. So, for example, all my friends starting up a new business and just need somewhere for a couple of weeks to store their products. But gradually then benefits, whatever they are, will reduce and may eventually come to an end. And more people will come and go from the address and use the address as part of the county line. The gang members can threaten the vulnerable adult verbally or physically if they kind of try and stop their criminal activity or stop them using their address. They'll also discourage friends and family and support workers from visiting the vulnerable adult's address. So if drugs are found at the property, it's likely that the vulnerable adult, being a resident at that address, will be interviewed or arrested by the police. If an occupier allows gang members to use the property for drug supply, they may face a prison sentence or fine. But if there's evidence to suggest that the adult is vulnerable and that they've been exploited by the gang, then obviously this will be considered when making any charging decisions, and safeguarding will be put in place. I'd say it's really important to be aware of cuckooing. It could be that you're working with a vulnerable adult that falls into this vulnerable category, or it could be that you're working with a child whose parents or responsible adult also fall into this vulnerable category, and they could be victims of cuckooing. We're also seeing things like Airbnbs that are rented for a week, being used, and then they move to somewhere else. Again, this is a bit of a scenario / case study relating to cuckooing, and again, a very common story relating to cuckooing that we see in county lines cases. But just have a read through it, think about what you would do in your professional capacity if you were confronted with this scenario, where or what interventions could we do or put in place to safeguard this individual. A trap house is a building or an address, and it's used as a base where the drugs are sold or manufactured or kind of divided up. And the houses or the buildings that are used could be a cuckooed address, so it could be an adult drug user, for example, and the children or other vulnerable adults are taken there or travel to the address to work in this trap house. They'll be sent to these, and they're usually kind of miles away, and they're owned by the OCG, or they've taken over that premises. It sometimes can be abandoned buildings, like the picture you can see on the screen is an example of what one looks like. They're really horrible. They can be really horrible places, and the children are usually left there on their own, or the vulnerable adults left there on their own, often with weapons to protect the premises and protect the drugs that are in there. The child or the vulnerable adult will usually get to that premises by public transport or taxis or hire vehicles. So you should see on screen now a picture of a train ticket. And a train ticket can hold up to 21 pieces of intelligence that British Transport Police can access. So you'll see on the screen all the different types of information that we can gather. And we can use these for investigations and also intelligence purposes. It allows us to map travel routes. We can check CCTV to see who bought the ticket, who collected the ticket, and also if anyone met that person when they reached their destination. These are really good for missing person cases, as usually the individual will give a false account of where they've been, but we can have a look on their train ticket or travel card if they have one on their possession. So if you are working with a child, for example, who has a few train tickets, bus tickets, anything like that, it's really important to take note of them. Take a picture, keep them, write down the information that's on them, and pass that intelligence across, as we can then start to build a better picture of where this person is travelling to and from. So just some general signs of county lines exploitation to look out for. Firstly, do they have frequent missing episodes? Are they going missing from school or their home? Do they have unexplained absences from school, or are they not attending regular appointments? Are they engaging, or are they avoiding school or work, something like that? Are they travelling alone to places that are far away? Are they being found in places where they may have no connection to, or very unusual connections, and they can't or won't explain why they were there? Do they suddenly have lots of money or lots of new clothes, new mobile phones, and they won't explain where it's all come from? Are they receiving more calls or texts than usual? Do they receive a phone call or a text and then they quickly have to leave, or then they go missing for a couple of days? Are they carrying or selling drugs, or have they been found with large quantities of drugs, cash or weapons on them? Or do they know someone who has access to weapons? Are they in a relationship or hanging out with someone or some people that are older than them or seem controlling? Are they forming new friendships with people and often refer to them by their nickname and maybe don't know what their actual name is? Do they have unexplained injuries? Do they seem reserved or like they're hiding something? Has there been a change in behaviour? Are they more kind of secretive, withdrawn? Are they isolated from their peers, their parents, any kind of adult or professional that is working with them? Do they seem scared or self-harming? It's unlikely that the children and the vulnerable adults will perceive themselves as victims. because they'll feel like they're part of the OCG and that's their job. But are they increasingly disruptive or hostile? Maybe they're more physically aggressive. Are they, talking about them being invincible and not caring what happens to them because others have got their back and others will protect them and look after them? Maybe they've got multiple mobile phones, multiple SIM cards, their number changes frequently, or they're very secretive of their phone. Having possession of hotel cards or hotel keys, or maybe sets of keys to premises that are unknown to their parent or an adult. Similar to the previous slide, do they have loads of travel tickets on them? Or have they been seen entering or leaving vehicles or cars or premises with unknown adults? I'm just going to touch on section 45 of the Modern Slavery Act, as I think it's important for you to be aware of. So sometimes we might face a scenario where a professional might hold some sort of information regarding someone that they're working with, and that information might relate to that individual committing some sort of criminal offence, but they're being forced to commit them offences. So, for example, county lines. These individuals are being forced to sell or move drugs by the OCG, and we're seeing this section 45 defence a lot in county lines cases. But in case the professional doesn't want to hand over that information, they may, not want to talk to the police about it because they don't want to criminalise that individual, which is understandable. But the last thing we want to do is criminalise someone who is vulnerable, whether that's a vulnerable adult or criminalise a child. That is the last thing we want to do. We want to be able to safeguard them. So this act in the Modern Slavery, this defence in the Modern Slavery Act was introduced to encourage genuine victims to come forward without the fear that they would be prosecuted for them offences. So it covers low-level offences such as pickpocketing, shoplifting, drug dealing, but it doesn't cover more serious offences such as rape, murder, and the trafficking of others. So it can't be used by alpha slaves, and that's a term that we use to describe an individual who was once a trafficking victim but has since kind of transitioned into the trafficking of other people in return of some sort of benefit from the OCG. The section 45 defence is complicated, but it's important to note, and it's important that we do receive information about those that are being exploited, so we can not only safeguard that individual, but it means that we're getting that intelligence so the police can then go after the perpetrators to stop them exploiting other individuals. So all of this work comes under Programme Precision at West Yorkshire Police, and Programme Precision is all about tackling serious and organised crime in West Yorkshire. So the next couple of slides are just some pictures of leaflets that we have, and please feel free to use them relating to county lines. So we really want to push early intervention and prevention in regards to county lines and preventing those from being exploited in the first place, whether that's a child or a vulnerable adult. And if they are being exploited, then we really want to push supporting them and getting them the support that they need. There are a few organisations on screen now that are really good in regards to county lines and supporting victims. We really need intelligence from partner agencies, so we can not only safeguard, but we can also target the dealers and the main principles of the OCGs. So we can use the Proceeds of Crime Act. We can start taking away money and other assets that the criminals have achieved through their criminal activity. Criminals don't like their money being taken off them, and it means, they then don't have money to invest back into drugs. And there's also the national referral mechanism. So county lines is a form of modern slavery, and any child that's identified to be a victim of county lines and modern slavery, they should be referred into the national referral mechanism. And for vulnerable adults, they're also entitled to go into the NRM for support. But obviously an adult has to give consent into the NRM. Therefore, it's up to them if they want to enter for that support. The NRM is not a safeguarding mechanism. It's just a mechanism to kind of identify and offer support to individuals that need it. I will put a video on the next slide about the NRM to give you a bit more background about that.
The National Referral Mechanism. Have you identified someone who could be a victim of modern slavery? Think NRM. What is NRM? The National Referral Mechanism, NRM, is the UK's mechanism to identify, assess and support potential victims of modern slavery. This is independent of any criminal investigation. The NRM can only be completed by a registered first responder. This includes the police and local authorities. Question: how old are they? If they're less than 18 years old, they will be classed as a child, and that affects how they will be dealt with. An NRM must be completed for all children that are suspected to be a victim of trafficking. This includes when they are believed to be exploited through criminality, such as county lines. They will be supported by the local authority. If the potential victim was trafficked as a child and is now an adult, they should be treated as an adult and consent is needed. Adults must give their consent in relation to the NRM. This is why it's important we understand what it involves, so the individual can make informed decisions. There are two distinct parts to the NRM process. The first is consenting to the passing of personal information and details. The second is consenting to the outreach support, including accommodation. Just because they do not want the support of the NRM, this does not mean they refuse consent. If an adult victim declines to consent to pass their details to the NRM, we still need to complete a duty to notify. This is to help the government and local police forces to build a better picture of modern slavery. Any DTN and NRMs completed will go to the local police force. The NRM is managed by the Single Competent Authority, SCA, at the Home Office. There are two stages to the NRM. Stage 1. This refers to the initial reasonable grounds decision. This is where the SCA review the initial referral to see if there is information available that suggests the individual might be a victim. This has two outcomes: positive RG or negative RG. Negative RGs can be appealed if you truly believe the individual is a victim. Positive RGs means the victim has now been accepted into the NRM and is entitled to a range of support. This includes a recovery and reflection period of a minimum of 45 days. Top tip: put as much information on the referral as possible. Not including information could mean that genuine victims aren't accessing the specialist support that they're entitled to. Remember, when completing an NRM, think about the act, means and purpose. These elements have come from the United Nations Palermo Protocol, and it's what the SCA will use to make their decision at Stage 2. Stage 2 is where the SCA review all the information available relating to the victim and their case. If you are working on an investigation with victims in the NRM, it's your responsibility to update the SCA on the investigation progress and any evidence which may help the victim receive a positive decision. As an investigator, where an NRM has been submitted by another first responder and you don't believe they are a victim, You should also keep the SCA updated with your investigation. The SCA will then assess the information and evidence to reach a final, conclusive grounds decision. The outcome of this decision can be a positive CG or a negative CG. Top tip: consistent and reliable contact with victims can increase their engagement in an investigation. Even if there is no update on the investigation, ring the victim or their caseworker and say that there is no update. This helps the potential victim trust the police and feel supported. During Stage 2, the victim will be receiving support from a subcontract provider. These are organisations around the UK who are contracted to provide care and support to help victims recover from their exploitation. The victim will receive a caseworker who will work with them to assess their short and long-term needs. This can include access to safe and secure accommodation, medical support, legal and immigration advice, mental health and well-being support. Top tip: make sure to make contact with their caseworker. Caseworkers build a trusting relationship with the victim and can hold a wealth of information the victim might not feel comfortable disclosing to the police straight away. For any NRM or DTN recorded in West Yorkshire by a police officer, this will require a corresponding modern slavery crime to be recorded. NRM and DTN forms are online and can be found at www.modernslavery.gov.uk/start. There are also offline forms available to download and use.
There are a variety of methods that you can report crime or share intelligence with the police. The first one's the Partnership Intelligence Portal, and it's a web-based portal that gives partners access to submit intelligence into West Yorkshire Police. So on the form you kind of state what it's relating to, so for example county lines, and then you can submit the information. We're not asking for anything extra than your kind of routine normal duties. There's no extra work, and it's not kind of designed to replace any current referral mechanisms that are in place. Any partner can access the portal, so local government, third sector, health, education, housing, charities, etc. All you need is an email address to set up access. We encourage that one organisation kind of have a shared email account, and it's kind of organised within your organisation on who reports through the portal. Can anyone report through it, or is it done via a specific team, etc. The second one is the online chat service. There's the online reporting facility as well, both on the West Yorkshire Police website. 101 and obviously an emergency 999, but also Crime Stoppers. They do a lot of good work around county lines, especially with it being anonymous, so you don't have to give any personal information out, and everything will be anonymous. We also have the West Yorkshire Police Community Alert, and this enables the public to keep in touch with police updates. You can choose what you want to receive according to your interests and how you receive them alerts, and the aim is to kind of boost engagement with communities and raise awareness of certain kind of crimes and local and emerging trends, of which county lines will be pushed through the community alert. Before we finish, I just wanted to touch upon COVID-19 and the impact on county lines, as obviously it's important. With most children not being at school in the recent weeks due to self-isolation, there has been an increased risk to them being targeted online, and gangs using social media to recruit and exploit children. They could be encouraging them to supply more locally instead of boarding public transport, and they may be providing them with bicycles to use that they can use as their kind of exercise for the day, as were the government guidelines at that point. Children are still being exploited for the purpose of drug supply. They're being trafficked in hire cars, taxis, push bikes. It appears that cuckooing is still an issue, and exploitation of vulnerable adults still remains. Due to the lack of general public using public transport, it's made it more difficult for those being exploited by the OCG to blend in. Most car hire companies closed or temporarily closed due to the isolation period, but as things start to open up again, originally they were only renting out cars to key workers for as little as £1 a day, and we'd seen OCGs presenting with fake NHS ID badges and posing in kind of key worker uniforms to enable to rent them hire cars to carry out their criminal activities. And as we come out of lockdown and things start to lift and restrictions lift, we may see an increase in violence between OCGs as they kind of try to re-establish their ground and where they're operating their county lines business. So we may see some sort of turf wars or increase between OCGs as they try to maybe recover ground that they lost during COVID-19 lockdown. We've now reached the end of the County Lines presentation, and I hope that it was useful and you got a lot of information and guidance out of it. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions, and I'll try my best to answer them. If I can't, I'll see if I can put you in touch with someone who would be able to answer the questions. Please do have a look at all the useful links and videos on the previous couple of slides. They are full of loads of useful information, and there are a lot of resources out there now relating to county lines, so please do make use of them. Thank you very much.